For today, I want to talk about the thing that everybody's talking about, so you can't get away from it. So we had an election this week. So I want to talk about some of my thoughts about the election, and then I want to talk about the autopsy, so to speak, of the Trump presidency, because it's dead. And so I think it's important to talk about that and how it might shape our future if it does. And so let's get into this. So the election was November 3rd, Tuesday, and Biden was declared the winner on November 7th, which was Saturday, yesterday. And being that this is my channel, I can be as open and as honest as I can. Let's be open about this. Yesterday was a great day. It was brilliant. And if it wasn't for somebody, okay, fine. But listen, yesterday was an amazing, amazing day in American history. For so many reasons. I was watching the celebrations yesterday, and it can drive a person to tears to see the type of jubilation that was going on because of Biden and Harris winning. I mean, let's just take a look at it. I mean, there were people in the streets, and by people I mean men and women, old and young, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. I saw straight people, I saw gay people, I saw people waving American flags, rainbow flags. I mean, it looked like America. It's amazing. It was just a beautiful thing to watch. And these people, for the most part, I know they weren't social distancing, but they did believe in science. They were all wearing masks, or almost all that I could see. And let's take a look at the Trump rallies or some of the Trump protesting that's going on now. What do I see? You don't even need to actually hear anything of what's going on. You don't. You just take a look in the crowd and you know who they're supporting. There's nobody wearing masks at the Trump rallies, or just very few. And the same thing at these Trump supporters protesting. And they look like a bunch of old, angry, white people. That's it. Mostly men, and many of them armed with weapons. For what reason? I don't know. I never thought that you needed to be manly or whatever to be strapping an AR-15 to you I just don't get it. But it's interesting. It was an interesting juxtaposition between the two. Very interesting too about what's going on right now with the Trump protesters, which I find is very interesting. I think it's an extension of the whole presidency. You see these in some areas, they're screaming, "Stop the votes, stop the votes." That's not American, but let's just go with it. You're allowed to protest. Now, in some areas, they're saying, "Count the votes, count the votes." Well, okay, and then in some areas, they're saying, "Recount, recount." So if we're going over this to really look at it, so we have in some areas where they're starting to lose, they want people to stop the voting. And in the other places where did I say that right? Okay, so if they're winning, they want the votes to be stopped then. If they're losing, they want to continue counting the votes. And if it's close, well, of course it's within their right. They should ask for a recount, and that's true. So it's really interesting because we live in a republic or a democracy, and we should go by the voting. But the Trump supporters, in the event that they lose, they don't seem to honor democracy. They honor Trump, which is odd. And notice that I said this because old school Republicans would never stand for this, and they never have. So this is why I'm pointing it out, that this is a whole different animal that we've got here. I was reading an article today in the RJ, which I'm from Las Vegas. So they're protesting here in Las Vegas also. And one person, Trump supporter, was saying, I don't know why we're starting to lose. Here's the answer: because we're starting to count the votes. Like, it's the funniest thing in the world, these people. Like, I don't get it. Like, they don't understand that counting the mail-in votes is part of the election, and it was part of Trump's plan in the first place, is that he was going to have his people vote on election day, and those votes are counted first. They didn't want the mail-in votes counted up front and first, so it would appear that Trump had big leads everywhere. And then he could declare victory, which he did, which is not what you do in America. This is what you do in authoritarian countries, you know, or what he would call third, well, he says worse words than I would, but let's just call it third world countries. So again, I'm trying not to make this an overly political show. I see it from a psychological point of view, that there's a lot of psychological pain and infection out there that, you know, thank God, you know, the right people won in this, because I don't even understand, you know, how these people operate mentally or emotionally. It doesn't make sense. I had, you know, the last 4 years, I've been trying to use, you know, a therapeutic approach to when I've talked to Trump supporters. Much empathy, much compassion, much explain to me, educate me. How do you feel about this? You know, what's the situation here? Tell me more about your point of view. And I have to say, I haven't had one real, honest, decent conversation with a Trump supporter in 4 years, because it usually lands in this area of no facts and just a lot of anger. And I'm going to take a second here to open this up. I've had hundreds of these over the last 4 years, because I've been trying to, you know, speak with them and give them, you know, the time that they deserve. We all want to be seen and heard. But here I have a person that I put on one of my radio shows I had in the past, and I gave her a full 60 minutes of time so she could sell her music that she was selling. And I, quite frankly, I understood the relationship she had with her husband, so I wanted her to shine more because she wasn't taking that position. And so I was more than nice to her. And then when her husband left her and all that, that's a whole different story. I'm not naming names here. I was there for her, and my girlfriend was there for her for a long time. And this is all it took to a type of response that I get. This is just one of many, many examples I have from many people. So she wanted to know why all of a sudden Trump was starting to lose in Nevada. And obviously it's because they were counting the votes. That's the answer. So I said to her, democracy, it's an amazing thing. And her comment was, you know, Joe, just unfriend me, okay? Your comments do nothing except insult my intelligence. I did not answer. She came back again and said, if you had any brains instead of steroid-filled muscles, you'd call it what it really is: deceit, dishonesty, and corruption. Okay? So, of course, I just said back, personal attacks don't help your case and only show yourself in a bad light. I never use ad hominem attacks, but I understand your frustration. And under the circumstances, I will forgive your unnecessary comment and just chalk it up to you having a bad day. I'm sorry for that. And that's the way pretty much I've been talking to all these Trump supporters the last 4 years. And it's just very, very interesting to me. So let's take a look back a little more in detail on Trump's 4 years. Because what I've noticed in a general sense is that there's a lot of hidden agendas here that interest me. Because, especially as a therapist, because people say things and it's not always the truth, number one. And number two, maybe they're not totally aware of what they're really thinking. So you have to ask deeper questions. So here's something. Let's talk about in terms of religion. Now, a lot of people support Trump because he supports pro-life. And that's not a problem. That makes total sense, of course. But they put Trump on this pedestal like he was anointed by God, like he's this special, you know, person that above and beyond all else, which that part doesn't make sense, because I don't think you could find a Republican who's not pro-life. You know, so why is he being put on a pedestal and exalted? It makes you think that there's a hidden agenda, that it's not really just the fact that he's pro-life. It sounds good to say that. but there's something else that's going on there. How about, let's take a look at when they say, well, because he speaks with no filter. Well, that makes no sense either, because drunk people do that, and children speak with no filter. It's not a reason to be the leader of the free world. They'll also say things like, well, he tells it like it is. No, because his skill set is very limited, as all of us are, right? That's why we have, or at least the president has advisors who he never listens to. Like he said, he knows more than the military does. Well, he doesn't. So he never tells it like it is. He says things and he thinks he knows, but he doesn't. So if you're reading that as he tells it like it is, that's not true. He's just talking off the top of his head. Let's take a look at one of the things that he does tout a lot, and some of his supporters do talk about as well. They say, well, he's great with the economy. But what's the hidden agenda here? Because is he? Because we have to take a look at the last 3 years of the Obama administration. They added 1.5 million more jobs than Trump did in his first 3 years. Now, of course, the last year was a total debacle and a catastrophe. So Trump is going to go down as one of the very few presidents that actually lost jobs during his presidency. But listen, I'm not here to bag on him. Let's give him a break. But I'm just talking about the last 3 years of Obama compared to the first 3 years of Trump. He got destroyed. Like, his job numbers were going down and down and down. Let's talk about the stock market, that he says we had the greatest stock market ever. The problem with that is that one day into his presidency, when the stock market goes up, he could declare that he had the greatest stock market ever. And the reason for this is because he was standing on a mountain already. What was that mountain? The stock market has been pretty much steadily going up for 7 full years before Trump took office. And then he took credit for it being at its highest. And in an inverse way, Unemployment was very low under Trump, but it was also very low under Obama, and it was already trending down for 7 years. So as soon as Trump was in office, the first month, boom, it goes down a little, he takes credit for something. That's the equivalent of me taking a car and driving it from, say, Long Island in New York, traveling all the way across country to California. And then when I get in somebody's driveway, I get out of the car and I push the car up the driveway. And I brag to everybody that I pushed a car all the way across the country. No, I didn't. I did the last 10 feet. I drove the other way. And that's what the thing is with Trump. Like, I saw some other thing too, that he was saying that the crime rate is down now more than it's ever been. Well, yeah, that's actually true. But crime was very high in the 70s. It middled off in the 80s. And somewhere in the mid-90s, crime has been very steadily moving down. So the crime rate started to come down when Bill Clinton was in office and continued through the Bush presidency and Obama and everybody else. So again, he's taking credit for things that never happened. So that's why these supporters are all over him saying that this is what he did, but they're not being factually accurate. You have to look at, are you ignorant or are you trying to hide under a hidden agenda? It's an interesting question. As a therapist, I got to ask these questions. To me, it's very, very, very interesting. So let's take a look at the deeper issues if we can. So why did these Trump supporters, I mean, obviously Trump won the first election, so that's amazing. That's an amazing thing to do, but how did and why did people rally around him? What was the central theme of Trump or Trumpism or his just rabid supporters? And let's take a look at it. Because as far as I can see, they really do stand out from a crowd. There's no doubt about it. Like when they wear those MAGA hats and, what are the distinguishing qualities when you see or talk to a Trump supporter? Now, mind you, I don't mean Republican, because Republican values and virtues and the way they hold themselves as human beings and have family values and things like this is much different than Trump. So you got to do that. That's why when you look at the other races besides the president, you realize that it wasn't a landslide. Like there were a lot of Republicans there were a lot of Republicans who won. And there's a reason for that, because the election was not a repudiation of Republicans. It was of Trump. They didn't want Trump. It's not that, I mean, there were many Republicans that just couldn't stomach, Trump's attitude anymore. So let's take a look at the central themes as I see it. Anger. Yep, that's right up front, right? Anger, bitterness, no political correctness whatsoever. Outright bigotry, upfront sexism, rampant homophobia, glorifying no empathy, no compassion, resurrecting white supremacy, flying Nazi flags and Confederate flags. And again, it's changed, right? Like when I was young, I was all about Leonard Skinner and they're flying the Confederate flag, but that was about music and the South and history, about just being part of our country. It had nothing to do with why these Trump supporters are so much into flying the Confederate flag and flirting with fascism and Nazism. It's a big difference. What else do we have here that signifies the Trump presidency? Pathological lying, up to 25,000 lies that we know of. A great new term, alternative facts. Never have to take responsibility for anything. Just don't believe in anything, say whatever you want. That's what people do now. Anti-science. How far has that gotten us with this COVID problem? Right? Anti-intellectualism. Throw out the people who know. Throw out the scientists. Throw out the intellectuals. We don't need them. Very, very similar to Nazi Germany. It wasn't about just throwing out Jewish people. It was about throwing out the artists. It was about throwing out people who had educations. We're doing this again. But we put a stop to it, thank God, right? Full-on attacks on minorities in every which way. I'll throw one out. Trump says this an awful lot. He throws out the term when he talks to a lot of black people. He'll say, they're low IQ. Listen, we all know that that's a put-down. But let me tell you something else why that's a dog whistle. Because a long time ago, there was a publication called Mankind Quarterly. And what it was a racist, white supremacist publication. And what they did was they would use pseudoscience to show that the white people were just genetically more gifted. They took about 15 of their scientists and therapists, and what they did was they came out with a book in the 90s called The Bell Jar, which would say that white people have higher IQs than black people because they were born that way. It's genetics. There's nothing you could do. It has nothing to do with environment. So again, the bell curve, and I think it came out in 1994, was based upon racist ideology. And that's why, so when they say you're a low IQ, that's what they're talking about. That's where it stems from. And I'll get into that a little bit later. They make fun of people with disabilities. As you see, Trump was openly mocking someone who had cerebral palsy, I believe. And he also makes fun of Biden, which is interesting because he has a stutter. And he had a very bad stutter when he was a kid. And he mostly overcame that, which I think is an amazing success story, as any decent person would. But no, instead of talking about policy, they want to make fun of his stuttering. They also want to say he has a dementia problem, which I have not seen any psychologist or therapist actually back him up on that. But what I have seen backed up is about 60,000 mental health clinicians have signed paperwork saying that Donald Trump was never fit for office based upon the fact he's a malignant narcissist and has antisocial personality disorder. So there's that. So again, they don't look at the science, they don't look at the professionals. They just start making up stuff and making up memes and doctoring up videos to make it look worse than it is. So what's fashionable now with Trump? Well, malignant narcissism, and what I said, antisocial behaviors, such as being sadistic, enjoying other people's pain. Cruelty is a big part of Trump's presidency. It was. I'd like to say goodbye now to fragile masculinity. You know, between the men's rights movement, which I was very nice with them. I've put them on the air and I've interviewed them and I tried to talk to them, and some of them are good people. They talked about, you know, men's rights in terms of, you know, being able to see their children, let's say. And, you know, some of that, it's definitely, they have some good valid points, absolutely. But if you mention Ruth Bader Ginsburg as somebody who has helped with men's rights, you know, because she has, she's probably the best men's rights advocate that ever lived. Of course, she's did it for everybody, for women too, but she definitely helped for men's rights. And if you mention her to anybody in the men's rights movement, they say no. She had nothing to do with anything. Why? I don't know exactly why, but I can tell you this. The Southern Poverty Law Center, most of the men's rights groups are known as hate groups. There's a reason for that, because it's more closely related to anti-feminism and anti-women. So, and they're very, very vicious. They don't even look at any of the facts of who's actually helping out men's rights, which a woman was probably their best advocate, and because she's a woman, they don't want to know anything about that. Another interesting term that you hear a lot during this Trump presidency is polarization. That was so polarized in this country. Yes, on the surface it looks that way, but I honestly kind of don't believe that that's true. I'll tell you why. Because if you are a good, decent, loving, caring human being, and you know that somebody is making fun of immigrants, let's say, or they're going after the most vulnerable among us, they hate women, they hate Muslims, they have a Muslim ban for absolutely no reason, you know, between being sexist and bigoted and racist, listen, there is no middle ground on that. You know, it's funny, they try to own the language here to say, well, if you're a liberal, you know, you're supposed to be so accepting of people. You know, you're supposed to just allow people to have their views and be who they are. Well, that's great. But, you know, if your view is that you're going to go out of your way to marginalize and destroy and to hurt people, there's no middle ground on that. You have to say no to that. You can't be okay with straight out, unadulterated racism and sexism in this country. It can't happen like that. So when they say it's polarization, I don't think it's polarization. I think good, loving, caring people are in the middle. And then they're the one on the side. Like, you have to fight it back. So it's not like there's two sides to that. Like, oh yeah, I love racism. Racism is a good thing. Like, that'll never happen. That's not polarization. That's just good people doing the right thing against very misguided people. And this is tough to say, by the way, because a lot of this is so hidden. You know, one of the most disturbing things about the Trump presidency is that I have a lot of people that I've hung out with that I call acquaintances or friends or family members. And it's so disheartening to know that underneath all of that, once they had a leader that allowed them to crawl out from underneath their rocks and to be who they wanted to be and to say things outright, it's amazing to me. It's so hurtful. You know, it's you want to treat everybody with love and care, and I choose to do that. But I know behind that there's a lot of stuff that I just can't agree with. You know, like I said, it's even in my own family. I would never understand it. You know, like even I would tell you that I would never look up to a guy like Trump, especially because, you know, he was, besides all the negative things that I've already mentioned today, let's add this. By the time he was 8 years old, he was a millionaire. Like, his father was trying to not pay taxes, so he would hide the taxes through his son's bank account. And then when he died, Donald Trump inherited like $11 million. Listen, if he would have put that in the stock market, he would have much more money than he has now. He's not a good businessman. He spent his whole life screwing people over and not paying people back. He has over 1,000 litigation cases. Bankrupt 6 times. You know, I come from a family that didn't have a lot of money, and I worked really hard. I went to school. I actually did my work. I didn't pay somebody to take my SATs like he did, you know? Like, there's no part of him, no part of a decent person that would look up to him and think that he's a role model. And I could say the way I was raised by my parents, I would absolutely make it that I cannot support a person like this. Interestingly enough, my sister, we have the same parents, and she would support him. So these are one of the things that I'm really trying to struggle with in my own life. But, you know, I'm very glad that this, at least Trump is over, and hopefully the Trumpism or the Trump supporters is going to go by the wayside. And a lot of these MAGA hats that they'll just be in the dustbin somewhere, or maybe in a museum next to Confederate and Nazi flags somewhere, and just be a very, very bad part of, you know, of the world in our country. It needs to go away. There's no part of it that seems to raise people to a higher level. It's very, very sad. So how did all this happen? I don't want this video to be too long. It probably already is. But so let me add this psychological aspect to it as well. How did it all happen? Well, there's something called the Overton Window. And I'm going to read this just so I get the exact definition for you. The Overton Window is this. It's a range of policies politically acceptable to the mainstream population at a given time. At some point, a policy position becomes, it's unthinkable. Like, people won't even consider it. But then it moves to somewhat sensible, and then it becomes popular. You know, like, say 30 years ago, if you were a politician, you couldn't say, let's legalize drugs. Like, you'd be out of office. But now, if you don't say legalize marijuana, you probably would get thrown out as well, right? So the Overton Window gets bigger or moves. Well, how did all this happen with Trump? Is that because the Overton Window has become massive. We're allowed to talk openly now about white supremacy. We're allowed to say, I like people who stand up for something, even though you might stand up for evil. So the Overton Window is huge. And how did it get to be that way? Well, it got to be that way for a lot of reasons, but let me keep this somewhat short. It was opened by what's called the alt-right. Now, the alt-right is pretty close to the KKK, but they don't wear hoods anymore. They wear suits and ties. They look very normal. They look like normal people. They look like bankers and whatever. It was opened by white nationalists, men's rights groups. And they did this through mass media or social media. You could say that it was through viral clickbait journalism, fake schools. Prager University is massive, and it has millions of views on it all the time. It's not a university. It's funded by right-wing extremists. And if you go on there and you click on it and you're young or you're alienated from the world, you might think that they're telling you the truth. There's nothing about that. They're actually rewriting history. I could go back over all their videos if someone was interested and messages me. I will do that. Because 95% of what they say is false. So again, misinformation through clickbait media. And people tend to retweet and resend and send things on Facebook much more often when it's fake than when it's real. So this is what's happened. And what did it lead to? It led to millions and millions and millions of people not believing real stories. They believe unverified stories. And they don't believe in traditional media anymore. I'll give you an example. You know, there's been this war on the right side, right-wing extremism, about anti-social justice warriors, like they're bad things, right? And it's a big part of what they do. But what they forget is that what is a social justice warrior? We're America. We are social justice warriors. That's what America is. Let's give you some more examples. You got Jesus, Gandhi, Buddha, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Martin Luther King. They're all social justice warriors. Since when did it get to be a bad thing to be a social justice warrior? That's what you should aspire to be. You know, I was listening to somebody the other day, and it's like, you know, thank God Biden won. It's much easier to be a parent now. It's much easier to be, you know, a good human being. It's much easier now for a society. We can get back to being normal and decent and caring. It's time. Let's get back to telling the truth and not giving so much oxygen and airtime to people who are just looking to get likes on Facebook and starting this. QAnon, it's another one. Trump completely supports conspiracy theories. And it became massively popular. And he rode that wave all the way to the presidency. So how is this whole thing? How was Trump born, so to speak, and became president? There's a lot of reasons. I'll give you like 2 or 3. It's because a lot of people feel socially alienated. There's a lack of education. And some people just have a need to go backwards. They don't want to move forward. There's too much competition now. And some of that competition, they're not just white men. They're women. They're people of color. Time to grow up, old guys, you know? It's time. You don't. So the Trump presidency is over. So what killed it? I'll give you a few. You know what killed the Trump presidency? Love. That's what killed it. Love. Decency. Decency killed it. And a progression to move forward. You have to move forward. You know, I think I read something about Henry Ford, you know, invented the car. Back then, if somebody was saying, well, how do we get from point A to point B faster? They probably would have said, well, get better food for the horses. Train the horses better. That's how we can move. No, he saw progression, real progression. Invented a car. That's why now, when you see these things about, you know, most people believe in global climate change. And Trumpsters are like, no, don't do anything. Don't stay where you are. Let's make America great again. You know, back like in the, I don't know, before 1920 or so, you know, when women didn't have the right to vote, when women couldn't even get a credit card, you know, when it was illegal for a woman to get birth control unless she was married, but a man could, you know, that's how far back they want to go. I couldn't even, you know, so let me end it with this because it's been a little bit longer of a video than I expected, to be honest with you. There's a new day. And this one is inclusive. This one wants everybody. This new America that we have right now is going to be what it should have been and what it was before this 4-year flirtation with fascism was. And now, hopefully, it's gone. We want everybody, men, women, young, old, straight, gay, you name it, Republicans, and even Trump supporters. We're America. It's time to move forward and stop fighting each other. I hope you found today's show valuable. I'm Joe Peroni from the Rise Above Project. Hopefully you can subscribe if you haven't, and you can send it to a couple of friends. That would be nice. I could use more subscribers. That's always fun. It's good for my ego. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you.